This job is weird. I mean, just think about it for a moment. A company spends hundreds, thousands of dollars putting together a product. They've got to decide on a name only to find out at the last minute that it means something unfortunate in Finnish. Design printed circuit boards so tightly packed together that it makes Jakarta look like the Sahara Desert. Source components whose prices are jumping around so much you'd think that they were made out of early Bitcoin. Decide on the exact shade of blue for the casing that Reddit will be up in arms about for at least 2 months, and then finally ship it to somebody like me for a review who looks at the thing for 1 second and goes, "Well, I like it, but I don't think it fits with the curtains." But I don't think the same can be true about the Retroid Pocket Nova, and I think that's probably down to the IKEA effect. No, that's not when you stupidly assume that you can fit a Billy bookcase into a Mini. It's a real psychological effect. People value something more if they've helped build it, and I think that this community has been building the Retroid Pocket Nova in our mind's eye for quite some time. With all the talk of the AYN Thor we've had over the last year, people forget how popular the Ambonic 476H was. They really nailed the form factor with that one. In fact, the most prevalent comment that I had on my 477M review is that they would love the same power of that device, but in the body of the 476H. They wanted those two devices smashed together, not in some sort of horrific car accident caused when a Mini veered out of control after the driver was struck with an errant Billy bookcase, but they wanted a lot of power with that form factor. And what have we got? The Retroid Pocket Nova. And for once, I'm going to give you a TLDR about my conclusions to this, because I didn't think that I would ever see one of these things. I couldn't afford to buy it myself. And then Chris over at the Retroid server was very kind, and I think he put my case to them very forcefully. I don't know if it was at knife point, but if it was a cheese knife, which wouldn't cut you, but would give you a rather nasty spreading. So Retroid have sent me this crystal unit over, and I have to say it is gorgeous, and we'll get to that a little bit later on, because that's not something that I would usually say about a unit like this. Regardless, Retroid don't have any editorial control here, and all of my thoughts are my own. But my conclusion is simple. This, right now, is the pinnacle of 4:3 gaming. You should go out and buy it now, because otherwise this might end up costing you a lot more later on. Usually I'll spend about a week with a device before I try and put a review together, but I've not had quite that long with this one. So this is a first impressions video, but I have played some games on here: Burnout Revenge, Tomb Raider Anniversary, Crazy Taxi, and obviously Super Mario World. I just haven't managed to do all of the testing that I would usually do with a unit like this. You know, a lot more goes into these reviews than my charming wit and ready repartee would suggest. 2 bottles of Red and a Valium for a start. But I have managed to take a look at the things that I was most excited about, not least that AMOLED display that everybody's calling the mortgage screen. Is it really good enough to bet your house on? Does a slightly smaller form factor stack up against the ergonomics of the 476H? Are we missing anything from not having an all-glass front, except for the sound of tinkling glass when your 4-year-old gets their hands on it? We'll be exploring all of this and more as we ask ourselves the question, is the Retroid Pocket Nova really out of this world, or is it a launch that never should have got off the ground? The Retroid Pocket Nova has been a name on everybody's lips since it was announced. There's been so much chatter over this. I mean, they say talk is cheap, but it's almost as if talk has been on a summer discount with 20% cashback and free next day delivery. The basic value proposition here is simple. What happens if you have a beautiful AMOLED 4x3 display paired with one of the most popular and compatible chips on the market right now? Under the hood is the Qualcomm QCS8550, and in my previous video I named that the Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, I'm trying to make it a thing, okay? But basically this is a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in a trench coat and a rather unconvincing moustache. Paired with that, you've got 8 or 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, depending on how much you enjoy spending your money. Storage is 128 gigabytes of UFS 3.1 on both models, and you've got a microSD card slot that's expandable up to 2 terabytes. There's a 3.5mm headphone jack, Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.3, and a USB-C port that'll handle charging, data, and video output of up to 4K at 60 Hz. And what you're charging here is a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which has a charge limit and charging separation built into the software as well, which should keep it running for some time to come. That battery capacity means that you've got around 4 to 6 hours of higher-end 4:3 emulation, and anything up to 16 hours if you're constantly playing Galaga on repeat. But the headline here is that the custom-made AMOLED panel, and I have to say there is something very special about this. From the moment that I turned it on, all of the graphics feel like they're kind of jumping out of the device at you, and it's not sitting underneath some glass panel. This is 1280 by 960, and that means it's perfect for integer scaling on the systems that really matter on this device. That's PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast. It also means that you're going to be able to upscale PlayStation 2 and GameCube to a 3x resolution, and then downsample them to fill the full 960p of the screen. And that added pixel density makes the pictures look incredible. Now, as I'm filming this, you might notice that there are some lines or maybe some diamond pattern on the screen. I don't know. I'm recording this before I film the B-roll. If you see that, it's something called moire. And it's a thing that happens on cameras because the grid in the sensor of the camera is out of line with the grid that's on the screen. So it's nothing to worry about, and it's not something that you're going to notice in real life. As Dean Martin once said, if you're filming your screen and strange lines can be seen, that's a moire. Obviously, being an OLED panel, this has got some brilliant, vibrant colour reproduction and beautifully inky blacks that you won't get on an LCD screen. In fact, putting this up against its near rivals, the Ambernic 477 series, you'll notice that the colours have just that little bit more saturation here, that the blacks are just that little bit more black, I suppose. Okay, some people are going to find this oversaturated, and I knew this before even getting the console, because this is something that we've seen before on the RP5, the RP Mini, the RP Classic, the Odin 2 Portal, the Thor, the Odin 3. OLED panels are often oversaturated out of the box. That's why Odin Tools already has a saturation slider built into it. But crucially, there is no color bleeding here. The panel itself isn't technically deficient. Now, this isn't going to be for everybody. Well, look, so many people love OLED screens, and there's a very good reason to love this OLED panel. But some people also prefer LCD screens because of PWM eye strain, dark scene details, color accuracy. But most of the time, those people are quite nerdy and they know what they want anyway. For most of us, you're going to see a screen here that just gets it right. That's actually what the community have been asking for in a 4x3 handheld for a very long time. And that's probably a beat that we'll come back to. I did just want to quickly mention, just in case people want to know, that I'm using NeoStation as a front end with this, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I'll probably do another video on that at some point, but it seems to work really well with the Nova. Now, I did do a few tests on this, and I didn't find any ghosting on the screen when it was put through a high-speed camera. It goes very, very bright. In fact, it'll hit 500 nits, which I've always thought makes it sound more like an insecticide. But it also goes quite dim as well for those of us who like to play games without having them burned into our retina afterwards. And when it was dimming, I didn't notice any colour shift or tinting like I have seen in some screens. We're even seeing better latency here due to the fact that this panel was manufactured to be a horizontal panel rather than retrofitted from an old phone. All in all then, this screen is something special, even though it's slightly smaller than its Ambernic counterparts. Sure, you're not really going to be playing much in the way of 16:9 content here, but that really isn't what this device is about. This is about retro gaming, and it's got a body to match. And this is where it comes to something that I mentioned in the introduction, because typically I don't like these clear plastic devices. I think they make them look too much like toys. But for this device, and in fact for the AYN devices that we saw earlier in the year, I don't think they look like toys at all. They look like dense and premium plastic, and they feel that way in the hand as well. In fact, I have loved the look of this thing since I saw the initial renders, and it was a joy to photograph as well for that very reason. And on a device like this, I don't really want a clear plastic shelf so I can see what's inside. I want one to see the way the light reacts to it. The crystal one in particular, I think, looks very special indeed. Coupled with that, you've got LED lights under the sticks. Some people aren't going to like them because instead of it being a circular effect that we're so used to, they're in a diamond pattern. The only problem that I've had here is that I couldn't find where to control the colours or the brightness because it didn't seem to be working for me. I have got that working now. It was just my inability to press the right button. But again, this is an aesthetic choice, and you're going to have to decide whether it's one that you're comfortable with or not. And the other thing to get comfortable with is the controls. Now, these clear units have these really nice transparent buttons with the icons raised up inside the plastic, and they look brilliant. They also feel pretty damn good as well. The buttons themselves are actually membrane switches, around about the same size as the Odin 3 when you look at them. They might seem a little bit too small, but that's because the button itself is under a transparent dome, and you'll feel a slightly larger area under your thumb. There's a nice amount of travel, and they're actually pretty quiet, which is something that you can say about almost all of the controls on this unit. And I should say, they're not too sharp. I don't think the buttons or the D-pad on here are sharp. Now, Russ mentioned this in his video, and I think he's right when he says that they are sharper than other units, but there's a big difference between being sharper than other units and, oh my god, my fingers have fallen off whilst I was playing Mario. These do have a little bit of an edge to them, but you know what? I prefer that than some of the more rounded D-pads and buttons that make me feel like my thumb's going to fall off the edge of it. The D-pad itself sits at the top of the device and is a really nice clicky experience. It's actually a little bigger than those on the Odin 3 and the Thor, but it's really lovely to play with. In fact, playing games on this feels pretty effortless. And I'm able to hit diagonals when I want. This won't quite pass the Contra test. And there are a few false diagonals depending on how heavy you are when rocking the D-pad backwards and forwards. But by and large, playing on this thing is actually a really good experience. The sticks on here, a Hall effect, really nice, a good amount of travel, but they have got quite small stick caps on. It's not something that I minded when I'm playing, but I know some people might want to switch those out for something like the ones on the Odin 3. But gameplay-wise, you won't be disappointed with this. And if you're a fan of the PlayStation 2 layout, I don't think you're going to have too many problems playing this either, even during games in big 3D environments. And that feel translates to the triggers and shoulder buttons as well. You've actually got quite thin shoulder buttons, but I didn't find myself missing them at all if I was trying to hit them. And the triggers here, again, are Hall effect analog triggers, perfect for those driving games. One thing I would love to see on consoles like this is that little switch. You know, the same one that you get on controllers that turn a quick firing trigger into a proper analog input. But looking at the size of this thing, I think you would have compromised on form factor if you did. Also included are two assignable M1 and M2 buttons, and I found these a little bit difficult to reach in normal usage, but still quite a useful feature to have. The unit itself sits in the hands quite nicely, and I've got to say, I found this incredibly comfortable, even for fairly long gaming sessions. I've heard that some people don't, and that's going to be based on how big or small your hands are and the position that you find most comfortable. There is, of course, the separate backplate, which you can pick up for, I think it's about $5, or they're included with some early orders, but since they haven't sent me one, and I don't think they've sent them to any reviewer, we can't test those to see what they'd be like. Your hand position is also going to have an effect on the audio as well, because some people will find that their hands are covering over the speakers. I have to say, I didn't. I'm finding that my hands sit around the console and actually concentrate the speaker's sound a bit more towards my face. I didn't find the speakers particularly loud, I have to admit, but the clarity was nice, and it does feel like a good, sensible volume when you're playing a game. And when you are playing games, you could well be playing a lot of 3D environments, because performance-wise, we've seen this before. We know that it will play Switch and game-native games if you really push it, because that's what the same chip has been doing on the Odin 2, the Portal, the Thor, and now the Retroid Pocket 6. The thing that's going to stop you here is the screen. It's only about 5mm shorter than the original PSP screen, but any time you play 16:9 content, you're going to have black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. I don't know about you, but the only time I like to see bars on my screen is when I'm watching Cheers or Prison Break. I think some people might find this a good device if they want a docked 16:9 experience and then a portable 4:3 experience, but others are going to find that too much of a compromise. What this really does well, though, is PlayStation and GameCube. Everything below that is going to run without a problem whatsoever. You can even push Sega Saturn games, because in terms of processor, this thing's a bit of a beast. And that means near-perfect PlayStation 2 emulation with enough grunt to push past "does this run?" and firmly into the "how far can I push it" camp. And the answer is you can push it real good with plenty of headroom to spare, so that you can crank the internal resolution on most games up to 3x, and even harder to run titles will work perfectly well at 2x. And you can add more costly shaders or filtering if you want. That means games like God of War, Burnout Revenge, Jak and Daxter are going to look even sharper than they did on the original hardware. With that incredible OLED screen, that'll show the graphics off better than anybody at any time could have dreamed of. And sitting right alongside that is GameCube and Wii as well. Of course, with the addition of turnip drivers, you're able to use the Vulkan backend and get the best performance out of these games, whilst removing any graphical inaccuracies that chips like the Dimensity 8300 can't deal with. Games like F-Zero GX, which typically punish weaker hardware, will hold its frame rate here as well. And fan favourites like Super Mario Sunshine, Mario Kart Double Dash, and of course the Legend of Zelda games all run beautifully. This is arguably the best these have ever looked on a retro handheld, upscaled and crisp, on a screen the exact shape they were designed for. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper retro console if you hadn't started Wind Waker, played it for about 5 minutes, put it down, fully expecting to come back to it, and then never pick the thing up again. And what I'm finding is that with apps like Cluster Tune or Pulse activated, I'm playing this without any fan noise to speak of, and with settings that are going to help preserve the hardware for longer. And actually, fan noise on this I don't think is too much of a problem. Anyway, I put this into smart mode and I barely noticed it, and when it does kick in, there is something of a whine to it. But I put this up against the Odin 3 and the AYN Thor, and the Nova was noticeably quieter. Now, I said this was an initial review, and I seem to have rambled on for quite some time, so let's bring this to an end with why I said at the beginning of this video you should buy this thing now if you want it. As I said in my last video, it isn't actually too expensive for the specs that you get here, for the quality that you get here. This is the first Retroid device that I have ever had, and you know what? I am really impressed with it. But not everybody is made of money, and it's fair to question whether or not this is a sensible purchase. My feeling is that for the things that you will want to play on this, you're really focused on, PS2 and GameCube and not much else. You don't really need the 12 gig version. I think the 12 gig version exists so that people who want to push Switch games or game native games and aren't so worried about the size of the screen can do that. But if you're going to do that, you better hurry up and do it, because just this week, Retroid have said that they're likely going to be incoming price hikes as Qualcomm will be raising its prices. And that's not just with Retroid, of course, that's going to be industry-wide at the moment, and that is a major, major problem. Okay, I'm just punching in here. This is what's called a punch-in industry terms, just to let you know that as I was editing this video, I had everything recorded, everything ready to go. Retroid have announced that from the 6th of August, the price on the 8GB model is going to go up by $10. It's still worth it. I can't tell you how good this thing is, which is a problem for a reviewer. It really is fantastic, but the only way to guarantee getting it at the best price is going to be getting it now. And that's not because of some sort of launch discount, but because the market right now is incredibly volatile. Anyway, I'm going to punch out now back to the regularly scheduled video. On the horizon is the Brickhammer Pro U, which, looking at the chip, won't be able to play nearly as much as this can. And the Mangmi Air Y Pro, which I don't have. I know some reviewers do. They sent me the base model, which I'll be reviewing next week. But the Pro, with its 865 processor in it and the vertical form factor, may be able to compete in terms of games played. We'll just have to wait and see. But my initial thought is that these aren't really going to hold a candle to what the Nova is bringing to the table. And part of that is the power, because none of them are quite as powerful as the chip in here. And part of them is the screen, because none of them are OLED. And that leaves this device here as the pinnacle of 4:3 gaming right now. And one that if you don't get right away, you may end up missing out on. I don't tend to say that about devices because there's often a good reason to wait. But this year, waiting seems to be much more of a gamble, so much more than just buying it sight unseen. And that's what I think anyway. And I would love to know what you think in the comments below. And do let me know whether or not you're thinking of buying a Retroid Pocket Nova. Have you bought one already? Are you waiting for it to ship? And what are you going to be playing on it when it arrives? But until then, thanks ever so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, if you'd like to help me support making these videos, then you can by getting a channel membership out on here or joining me as a paid membership over on Patreon. Doesn't matter which one you do, you'll still get the same perks for both. Until next time, though, thank you ever so much for watching. I'll come back onto the Retroid Pocket Nova very shortly, because actually I think there's much more to talk about when it comes to this device. But until then, until next time we come and sit together in the Retro Corner like a naughty Game Boy, happy gaming.